Hello, good afternoon. My name is Prim Gill, and welcome to the panel, How to Get on the Roster in BC as a Director. I'm the CEO of Creative BC, and I'm speaking to you today from my home here on the unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples, the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish. My family's been settled in these territories since 1967, and we've had the privilege to thrive and grow. And for that, I'm very grateful. I'm also thrilled that I have some amazing panelists with us here today who are going to be sharing their experiences, their wisdom, and a lot has been changing in the last few years. What I'm going to do is I'll quickly introduce them, and then I'm going to have each of them tell you a little bit about themselves for about 3 minutes, and then we'll go into some questions, and there will be time for Q&A after. So please do make sure that you are thinking about questions that we don't answer or even thoughts that are triggered for you. So welcome to Nimisha Mukherjee, Sud Sutherland, and Sharon Lewis. Today, I know that Nimisha and Suds are here in the Metro Vancouver area, and Sharon's speaking to us from Toronto, and all three of these people have worked in BC recently or are currently on a production working as directors. So if it's okay, I'm going to kick it right off with you, Sharon, to introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about your journey to becoming a director and what you've worked on recently.
Sure. Thanks, Prem. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. So I started in front of the camera. I started in the 90s in front of the camera as an actor. And one of the first big roles that I landed was this title role in Clement Virgo's film called Rude. It was the first all Black above the line movie made. And then it went to Cannes and it did really well. And and so I was like, this is great. Acting's amazing. I was like, this is going to be great. I packed up and I went to LA, and then I didn't work for about 7 years. And partly that was I went to LA and kept looking for that same experience, that same quality of script. And I kept getting sent out for sitcoms. And because I'm mixed, Indian and Black, LA had no idea what to do with me. They kept wanting me to speak with a Latinx accent, which I wouldn't do. And so I had a really hard time. Anyway, at the same time, I was working in theater and I did this play called Sisters, and it had taken off and it had done really well. And I had directed it and I really loved directing. So I went to UCLA for directing and started studying directing and started making a whole bunch of short films and really loved directing, still was broke, and then got offered to host a CBC show. So I came back, made some money, was hosting the CBC show, and I loved the hosting. And then 9/11 happened, and it was a live political debating show. And I felt like I couldn't do a whole other year of that. And so then I left and I hosted a show called Zed. And while I was doing Zed, again, I wanted to direct. And so I left that hosting gig and started directing. And the only way that I could break into the industry, even though I had been in the industry for a while, no one was hiring me for scripted. So I went into unscripted, and being a woman of color, basically they were like, you can do food and you can do design. Two things I have no idea about. I can't cook and I don't like to paint or design or do anything, but I do like to direct. So I did really, really well in unscripted and sort of got hooked into that. But still my dream was to direct scripted. So I kept doing these short films. And then finally, about 5 years ago, I was like, even if I have to be broke, I'm going to make my feature film. So I made a feature film called Brown Girl Begins, and I made it on an Arts Council budget, which is like 20 cents. Thank you, Arts Councils, though. And I thought for sure then, and it's funny, Suds's producing partner and life partner, she was like, oh man, now it's going to happen for you. I remember her talking to me. She's like, it's going to blow up. And it just didn't. I literally, for 5 years, still couldn't get work. I would ask like people to help, let me shadow, and I would shadow. And what I just want to say to this is what happened to me. I don't know if that happens to these guys, but what happened to me was I started to think it was about talent. I started to think that maybe I just don't know what I'm doing. Maybe there's just this super talented group of people doing things that I just will never be able to do. And then I got a break and I went and the producer on my film is a creator of Digstown. He hired me. And the best thing that ever happened to me was like, I realized there's no secret club. Like directing is directing. It's working with actors, it's blocking, it's camera moves, it's telling the story in the best way you can tell the story. So that was a big boost for me because
Mhm.
I think as a woman of color in this industry, what constantly gnaws on me is that maybe it's not just gender and racism that's keeping me out, maybe it's talent. And it's interesting to see that mediocre white men get hired over and over and over again. Um, and so that was helpful. That was
Mhm.
just helpful for me. And then I ended up working in BC in the summer on a movie of the week for Lifetime, which was the most excellent experience. One, it was BC in the summer. Two, it was working with two Black female execs, a Black DP, Black scripty, Black gaffer, all Black cast. And it felt like it had come full circle from when I was an actor on Rude to be able to actually work in that environment again. So I feel invigorated. Okay, I will stop talking.
No,
Somebody.
no, that's fantastic. I have like 30 questions for you already, as
Right.
I'm sure others do, but we're going to come back to a lot of that. But thank you so much, Sharon, for setting that up for us in terms of your history and your experience. And Suds Sutherland, welcome to BC, and thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me, Prem. Thanks for inviting me over to your offices. My name is Sutherland. My government name is David Sutherland, but there's a lot of Davids in film, so I go by my nickname, which is Suds. I've started off as wanting to be an actor and not getting into high school plays. And then there was this play called Raisin in the Sun, and I thought, oh, great, I'm going to get in this play because it's Black. And I didn't get in that play either. So I was like, whoa, this is terrible. So then I thought, you know what, I'm going to have to write my own play to get into, get on stage. And so I wrote my own play, and then I gave it to the director who I thought was like the best in the school. And then he said, oh, it's pretty good for a Black play. And I was like, what? Pretty good for a Black play? What are you talking about, dude? And so like, that's ridiculous. So I said, okay, well, I'm going to just direct this thing. This couldn't be too hard. And then I did it, and I fell in love with directing. And so after that, I just never sort of really acted again. But then I continued, I started writing. And then so I started off as a writer's assistant, script coordinator, and then sort of worked my way up to staff writer and then freelance writer. And then at a certain point, I was like, I'd love to direct my own stuff. And then so I wrote a short film. And then Jennifer Holness, who's my life partner, mother of our children, and who runs Hungry Eyes, said, "Okay, well, let's produce this. Let's make this happen." So we did this on an Arts Council budget, but it was a short film, so we were able to actually pull in all of our favors. Shot it in a week, and then that short film won the HBO Short Film Award, and it won like tons of award at Yorkton and like across the country, and it did really well for us. And so that sort of put us on the map. And then that was how I got the funding to do my first feature called Love, Sex, and Eating the Bones. And that did really well. It won all kinds of awards, blah, blah, blah. And then it did well theatrically, and then it sold to Showtime, BET. Like it put us on the map on a larger way. And then so after that, began to do a lot of television directing. So it's like, it was like, as Sharon is saying, like, well, how do you become a TV director? How do you become to get on these lists? And it's like somehow you have to make some sort of noise for yourself to distinguish yourself from the mass of people wanting to do this, because there's a lot of mediocre people who are doing this. That's like straight up. And sometimes these things are given out like favors, like candies. And then actually, like now actors are having now more deals and putting it as a conditional part of their deal. Like, I want to direct one episode on the show this season. And so that always takes like the available pool of episodes down. So this is now happening, and it has been happening consistently for a number of years. So in terms of like, how did I get on these lists? The first thing was to have that feature that made some noise in the box office, made some noise to distinguish yourself again from the mass of people who want to do this. And so that's how I got the first job. And then the second job after that, it just sort of, you hopefully go back to them the next year and have that. But one of the things is that to get even around this thing, you need to have some shadowing opportunities. Now, of course, through COVID, this is going to be a lot more difficult. And COVID is going to be with us for a number of years. Let's be straight up. So now, how do we get on those lists? It's a big question. I'm trying to get on lists for different shows. If you're at this level, you're trying to get to this level. If you're at this level, you're trying to get to this level, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a continually It's a continual process of like, how do I get on that list? How do I get to do that show? And it's like, it's always trying to level up. So that's where I'm at now, trying to get on like the next list. But that's, I think that's, everybody is in that, like everybody's trying to get level up. Everybody's trying to do it.
Yeah, that's really great. Suds, I want to come back after we hear from Nimisha on the question of, you mentioned it as well, Sharon, who's in charge, how you get on, not just getting on these lists, but how do you get the recognition as well? And that is based on your experience. Nimisha, hi, welcome. Nice to see you.
Hi, so I'm just started shooting and we had a location-ish dropout. So sorry, I slid in right at time.
So Nimisha, tell us about your background and what you're working on right now.
Yeah, so I'm Nimisha Mukherjee. I'm a director. I'm currently working on season 2 of a Disney series called Gabby Duran and the Unsittables. And after that, I'll be working on Motherland. But the journey to get here has been like an interesting one for me. And it's really always fascinating to hear how other people, like what other people's paths were, because I wish I had known more about that when I started, because what Sharon mentioned is, you don't really understand what's the path and if what you're doing is right. And you sort of internalize all of that and come up with reasons why you're not moving forward. But for me, my breakout film, my first feature out of UBC Film School was a documentary called 65 Red Roses. It was selected by Oprah Winfrey for her documentary club on OWN. It went on to win a number of awards and play internationally. And it was really a launching point for me. At 25, I was like, okay, I did the thing. I did the big first movie. I co-directed it. But it was, it was an incredible experience. That film just did so well. And I, similar to what Sharon is describing, I remember going down to LA and being like, okay, so what's the next step? And here, kind of thinking I need an agent or I need something, but not really understanding how the system worked. Ironically, my co-director, who is a white male, who I dearly love, he got an agent out of 65. It took me another 7 years to get an agent myself. And so that film, also I was in Vancouver when I made that film, and it was 2009. And what I'd been told would be a calling card film, and under normal circumstances in 2009, the whole industry collapsed here. And really all those American productions disappeared. And so I just went out and did what I knew, which was I went and made another documentary feature called Blood Relative. That film got a number of CSAs. I got my second CSA nomination for directing. And that led me to be able to make my third feature doc. But that whole time I kind of understood that, I was on a documentary unscripted path, and I was, working in factual. I worked with Vice, as an episodic or as a series director, and I was working with National Geographic, and I was doing that to pay the bills and keep my own projects going. And at the same time, I did Crazy Eights in 2013 and did a narrative film there. The year before, I did a short narrative film through TIFF, through their talent lab, that won an audience award. So I was doing all these things that, normally you would hear as like, yeah, I'm ticking those boxes. Like I've done the short, I've done the feature, I've done factual series. But I was finding it incredibly difficult to get to the next step. And I had shadowed James Dennison, Bruce McDonald. I'd done shadow programs. I think I've done every sort of available program that's available, like fellowships, BAMF, Women in Television Toronto, Women in Television in Vancouver. I've done it all. Like I've applied for everything, I've gotten it all. And I was like, what, there was something that was just sort of not enabling me to get to the next step. And in 2015, I got the DGC Ontario mentorship. And what was amazing about that was I actually, I became part of the union for the first time. It took me a couple of years to still understand what that could do for me, but I was in the union, so that was good. And I shadowed Gail Harvey. We hate using the word shadow. We're trying to change that word to observer, but in any case, and she was like, you really, look, what is preventing you from getting into episodic television? I was like, I really don't know. And she's like, well, I think what you need to do is you need to just don't go back into factual, because at that point I was like 2 years of observing on this, observing unpaid as I was doing all my other documentary work, and I kind of was like, maybe I'll just go back into factual. But as everyone here probably knows, factual pays significantly less than working in scripted. And after doing 3 feature docs and always ending up back at square one. I was like, I want to actually, move forward. Like, I want to move forward in terms of making this a sustainable career. I also want to work in scripted. I totally know I can. And so I got connected through friends through a program that Zach Lipovsky and Brian Hamilton at Omni were in working with Disney, had what it was called kind of like Survivor for female directors. They were picking 5 female directors to shadow on a block, which is 2 episodes on their first season of Mech X4. And they would pick one of those 5 to come back to shadow again. And maybe you would get a chance at an episode. And so I was that person that got to the second phase, and then it was sort of like crickets. And at that point I was like ready to turn in, throw in the towel, and said, I'm going back to unscripted. And Brian Hamilton basically said to me, there's this program, another program, this time it's called Women in View, working with Sinking Ship, called the 2 Times More program. They're going to pick 3 female directors from across Canada. But the thing about it is you'll observe, but then you'll get an episode. And so I applied to that. I got that and went, I directed my episode, and basically Disney hired me based on that rough cut of that episode, because I think all they wanted to see was I could, they wanted to know I was familiar with the show, but I also could work with VFX. And then I did that Mech X4 episode, and I did one more Dino Dana, and it was about 1.5 years of nothing. I had this half hour with, and Mech X4 had action, VFX, stunts, like everything that people had told me I couldn't do. It had it all, comedy, drama. And I had this, and I, I got an agent out of it, but I couldn't get another episode. And so it was about 1.5 years of like really hustling, going down to LA, meeting with everybody I could meet, and just really, really pushing myself. And then, because I kind of checked that children's TV box, but now the next, as Sud said, you're trying to level up. So I was trying to get into, working with adults, grownups. I can work with grownups. So I got a meeting with Alison Sweeney, who is the producer and star of Chronicle Mysteries, which was for Hallmark. And they hadn't had a female director yet. And we clicked over our love of true crime. And I basically told her, I was ready for this opportunity, and I really wanted to do it. And she gave me that chance. And so I was nominated for a Leo Award this year for that. That was my first MOW. And then it still took, this last year of really, really hustling to break into that 1-hour prime time, which will happen next month with Motherland. So it's been a hustle for sure. And it's been fun, but it's been a hustle.
Yeah, I mean, I think what all of you, the shared thing is that, I think we do have to talk about like race and discrimination and those kinds of challenges that you've seen your peers who don't have those excel, and but that you keep hustling, right? So you haven't, Nimisha, there was many times where you were like, okay, I'm done, I'm going back. I remember meeting you at the VIF closing film with your documentary in 2009, and I was so excited. There's like this young woman of color who was going to accelerate in this industry. You could just see it in that work, but it's been many years since then. And I've seen others who, along with you at that time, whose careers are in a different place. And you are getting there, absolutely. But I mean, I'm sure it's been trying sometimes, Sharon, what about for you? Like where, you do keep going, but you do see those, do you see those barriers and challenges that, still remain there in terms of how you have to prove yourself?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because if you asked anybody in the film and television industry, they would say you have to hustle, and that it's a difficult industry to break into, and it's based on network and who you know, and there's a finite number of jobs. What is different, I think, for women of color and people of color is that we automatically are assumed that we can't do the job. So you walk in and there's an assumption. I feel this way. There's always an assumption. When I was younger, there was always an assumption or a challenge from the DP, always. It was always like, you can't do this. No, you can't do that. No, we can't turn around. No, blah, 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 blah. So I went and took a lighting course because I was like, I need to be able to speak back and be able to use that language and say, actually, I know you can throw a kino up here, you can do this or whatever. So that's one thing, is that I think, when I've talked to other directors, white male directors, that has never been an issue. And in fact, 2 of the directors who work a lot said to me, you know, when I started in the industry, I didn't even know anything, you know, but I walked on set and, you know, I'm making up names, but Ralph was like, don't worry, dude, I got you. No problem. I'll help you out with the, oh, lenses, you don't know lenses? Listen, Harry over there will, well, you know, so there's an automatic community and an automatic support system. I'm not saying it happens all the time, but when you feel like you're part of that group or the group feels like you're part of them, there is an automatic communication and language that happens that does not happen automatically for in my experience as a woman of color. Or if you look at institutionalized racism and institutionalized gender discrimination, it just doesn't happen. There has to be a reason why 50% of women who graduate as directors, you know, it's 50-50, right? And then the women don't work. Like it just, you know, what happens? Do we all just go, you know what, directing's not for me. I think I'll just make a little money and go do, you know, unscripted. Not that there's anything wrong with unscripted, but it's not a choice, you know?
Yeah. And Suds, what about for you? You did your own projects. Now you work with, you know, major studios as a director. And what has that transition been like? You'll just have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, it's a transition that's never sort of fully over, because it's something we're constantly, like, I go into some meetings and people like, you know, one particular nameless producer who does a lot of shows and who I've never worked on her shows. I went into her and say, you know, I want to work on your shows. And she's like, before I said anything, she's like, so you do your own shows. And I was like, immediately put me on the defensive. And I'm like, I like to do my own shows. And, you know, that's, you know, how I you know, survive, but thrive artistically as an artist. I consider myself an artist. And, but the idea that somehow as a Black creator, I'm a threat to her, is something that's come back to me, not from just that producer, but from other producers too. Because I'll say, well, I'd love to work with you. I'd love to work with you. I'd love to, you know, bring what I do to your show, what have you. But you constantly get this kind of pushback, not from everybody, but from some people who consider you a threat if you're a creator of color. And so, you know, maybe they look at the whole world as, you know, every other creator as a threat as well to their quote unquote livelihood. But I think that's kind of an entitled viewpoint, because there is no sort of thing like where it's like, well, you have a right to produce shows. Like nobody has a right to do any of this stuff. We're all trying. We're all part of the same AV club, you know? And so I like to think of us, you know, as part of this giant AV club. And there's always constantly pushback because you're seen as, you know, like Sharon, you talk about like you're seen as automatically, you can't do it, you know? And I guess like in the first part of my career, that was totally always people were saying, oh, you can't do it or whatever. But once you prove yourself, they're thinking, okay, well, they can do this and they'll put you in that box. And then, but you're always trying to like get out of that box, you know? And so like I can saying, well, I can do this. Like you saying, if you start off doing comedy, it's like, well, can they do drama? And then you do drama. Like, well, they can do that. Can they do action? Can they do effects? You know, and then you try to get out of all these boxes and say, look, I'm an artist. I love doing this stuff. I love working with actors. So it's a constant sort of push to get out of that box. But like, you know, like when I said I want to be a writer to my dad was like, writing? That's what lazy man's working on. And then I was like, what? Where did you get this from? But, you know, he's Jamaican, he's an electrician. That was what his whole thing was. But the other day we were talking and he's like 81 years old. He's still working. And he's like, so when are you going to come out with something else? You know, you've been doing all these shows and whatever, but when are you going to come out with a new series, a new film or something like that? And I was like, whoa, okay. You know, because he's getting pressure from his friends at the JCA, Jamaican Canadian Association. When his son's going to come out with something new? So, but like you're constantly, you know, trying to come out with your own stuff, but you're also like, hey, I love working on shows. I love working on these shows coming in, and that's great. But like, I think though, there's no end to this because there's always going to be projects that you fall in love with, ideas that you have, and you're like, oh, I wish I could take some time and write this down, but I got to put food on the table. We got 3 daughters, and they like to eat and they like to wear clothes, so it's like, you know, I have to make money. But we are lucky that we can do this, you know, practice in in this industry that we love and working with actors and working with crews. But I think, Prem, it's like, it's a thing where we're constantly in this sort of a flux because we want to do our projects that like really speak to who we are, but we also would also love working, with crews on these shows. So, I mean, we want to do both. And I don't think that's like mutually exclusive. I don't think that's like, we shouldn't be able to do that.
And maybe some of that is shifting now in this sort of COVID life that we're living. And I want to get into that in a little bit. But Nimisha, this idea, and I know you and I have talked about this before, that Suds brought up around, people immediately seeing you as a threat when you enter, a role. And do you want to share anything on experiences that you may have that you could relate to that?
Yeah, I've had everything from people refusing to say my name or even try to say my name on set, being like, can you tell her to move? Like stuff like that, where they just, really openly disrespect you in front of a crew. Or, I had a team where I literally had said what I wanted set up. We talked about it. I went to go work with the actors, came back, it set up something completely different. And so there's a little bit of, there's definitely been pushback. On the other side, on the other end of it, I've worked with incredibly amazing people. And I think part of the, this isn't something that you can do on your own. I can't push myself my way in there. It has to be that somebody sees something in me as well and gives me that chance for that opening. And a lot of the times, as Suds is sort of, touched on, is a lot of these decision makers are not diverse people. So you have to, connect, again, it's that added trait of being able to connect to people on a personal level. And I think what I've had to do is, even recently, on the show I was on, I asked where the director of parking space was. And the person literally didn't hear me say that and directed me to crew park. Like, did not hear me say I'm the director. Like, it just could not compute that. And so it's like a very, interesting process to understand that, I have to deal with that, but then also do everything that I want to do. And I think because it's always been there, what it's made me become very good at pitching myself, presenting myself, and not allowing it to get in my head too much, because then otherwise it makes me do less of a job, and that's not fair to me, because I want to go give 100%. So it's you experience it. And I think with my name as well, like even call sheet spelled name wrong, even contact list, they Mukherjee, they've put 2 I's, so I didn't get any of the emails. Like, it's a very, very, you realize that people just aren't used to dealing with ethnic names and practicing, like they're just not used to it. The whole industry is operating in a way that's been very exclusive. And so it's shifting, but there's definitely, can feel that anxiety, and also, while, these are great opportunities to share your story of how you got there, I still get people being like, and people who I like their colleagues being like, oh, so you must be working so much right now because you're, everybody just wants to hire diverse female talent. You hit everything. You must be working so much. And it was really, bizarre for me to hear that, because I was thinking, change does not happen that fast. Like, people want to believe that all these diverse voices are stealing all their jobs. And it's like, no, there's been a lot of people working for a really long time and sticking it out. And they're finally getting, small little opportunities that they're building off of. But it's, this idea, this notion, and I think also just touching on what Seth was saying, sorry, but, why, there's also this fear of like, well, if we're the creators and we're hiring, we're not going to just go the, usual route here. There's going to be a disruption to the system as it's been operating. And I think that there's a genuine nervousness about this, because it's change and people have trouble with change. We've seen that.
Yeah, that is, it is a long play, right? Like you say, nothing is magically, I wish it could actually in some ways happen overnight, but it's certainly not. What you said around, you all brought it up in different ways around who's in charge and who's doing the hiring and representation. And when you see, if there's more Mukherjees on more productions, people can say Mukherjee. It's very easy, right? Like, this is not, it's actually phonetic, your name, right? So it's not.
I actually changed my name to I've had to I've always said Mish, like I keep introducing myself as Mish, and somebody was like, why are you saying that? Your name's Nimisha. But it was because for the longest time, people would just panic hearing the name, and then they just wouldn't call me or, address me because they were so scared of the name. So then I just shortened it for people. But these are the kinds of weird identity things you're dealing with when you're.
They are. And this is what, systemic racism and views are all about. And this is what we're trying to continually break down, I think. And the conversation has broadened, I think, for the first time in a long time. Sharon, you talked about a production that you were on this summer in Victoria that had a largely crew that was Black, people of color, the executive producer. So just on that idea of when certain people are in charge, you see shifts and change, and the culture on set. What was that like?
Yeah, because I think what we're talking about, Suds and Michelle and I are talking about craft. Like, we want to be able to do our craft, right? So we want to work in circumstances that support us doing that craft to the best of its ability. And my experience on that crew was because I had 2 Black female producers. When something came up, like, for example, we needed to have the wedding thing that you put on a cake. I'm losing the word, the topper or whatever it's called. Suds, help me.
Sure.
Cake topper.
Cake topper.
Yeah, that's it. The thing you put on the cake, the cake topper. So this is a Black couple. So, it kept being put forward, these sort of white people painted Black, like just white people. And I was thinking, how hard is it to do the research, to go and to find a cake topper that is appropriate? Just something like that. And I think and it's not because, my feeling was not because that person didn't want to, but they literally did not know how. They just didn't know the terms to even put in Google, like Black cake topper. Like, they just didn't even know. Do I put, African American? That experience was interesting to me. But what was great was that I had a whole backup behind me to be able to say, hey, dude, you kind of need to do the work. Let's look into this, which he did. But I didn't have producers going, oh, it's not a big deal. And what's the blah, blah. Like, they got it. They got it immediately. So I think it's those kinds of things that just help you do your craft, as opposed to then having to spend half an hour and explain why this is actually really important, or to have it just sloughed off. I mean, that's a really small example, but it's so important to be supported in your craft so that you can do the level of excellence that you want to do, no matter what the project is that you're on.
Yeah, I mean, they may sound or feel like trivial examples, but they're not, because it's one of literally thousands of examples probably that everybody could share a story on that's similar. So Suds, a lot of questions I think that people who are tuning in might be thinking about is, so how do we, you talked about your journey through shorts, features, the festivals, working on Canadian episodic television to now, some major US production episodic shows that you're directing here in Vancouver. What would your advice be, both to the studio executives and to the producers, but also the people of color, Black and Indigenous people who might be watching this today on, how do you start to tackle that? What conditions do we need? Just answer those questions in 2 minutes if you can.
It's like a huge amount of questions. I think for people trying to break in, I think like the shadowing thing is going to be very complicated, to be honest. Like the amount of people that are even allowed on set now, it's all completely controlled. Shadowing is like literally out of the question until we get a handle on this COVID thing. But in terms of like getting seen and noticed or what have you, we have to it's shorts, it's web series, it's like your independently produced feature, whatever it is that you can do to make some noise out here, because we are starved for entertainment now. Like, we want some things that speak to what we're going through right now. I think people want to see things, new, fresh things, especially from this, Generation Z or whatever people want to call themselves. But I think that we, have to, you have to, don't lose hope and think, okay, well, that's not going to happen. You can create something for yourselves. And there's a lot of actors I'm meeting now, like, well, I'm kind of sitting on my hands, so I'm just going to create something. And so I'm meeting people who are interested in doing that now. So I think that now we're going to see a whole bunch of stuff come out. But I think that, just yet and still, the scripts have to be like on point. The writing has to be on point. The production can be low tech, but the writing has to be on point. So those things, and then create some noise for yourself. I think that's how you get noticed. I think that's the only way. And as a person of color, as a woman of color, it's going to be harder because systemic change is not happening, as Prem said, it's not happening overnight. There's a lot of resistance to this. I got all kinds of old, my directing peers who coming at me with, yeah, I lost my job to a Black woman. I lost my job, because that's what their agents are telling them. And that's not exactly the truth, because guess what? None of those jobs is your job. None of those jobs is my job. Like, they're just a bunch of slots, and they go to whoever they go to. For years, like, I would call the DGC and not get a call back because I was trying to get into the union. And not get a call back. This was before the internet. So like, I didn't know anything, didn't know anybody get in, whatever. And it was like this wall, this like impenetrable wall. Now things are a little bit more, okay, a bit more approachable. We get people in, blah, blah, blah. But the thing is that none of these jobs are sort of destined to go to X number of people. You've got to compete now. And white men now have to compete with all of us. And before, it was kind of like, well, you wouldn't even know, like, the shows would be booked up just as soon as they were announced. Oh, all the slots are taken. Like, whoa. And that was like, for years, I get that. Like, I've been trying to do this, like trying to get into these shows for years. And it was tough. I would tell Prem, like, I'd see Prem at like Whistler, or see her at film festivals all over the country. And she goes, when are you coming to Vancouver? And I'm like, I'm trying. I'm trying. You think I'm not trying? I'm trying to come to Vancouver. But it was like a closed industry, and it was like completely closed. And I told people I would work as a local, I'd work as whatever. And like, people like, nope, it's closed. You're not going to get it. And so, but gradually things began to open up. And then, but by going to LA and continuing to meet people down there who were, and again, you have to look at it as sort of a strategy. Like, you have to go to talk to the executives at the studios. You got to talk to the executives at the network. Then you've got to talk to the showrunner. Like, you've got to talk to a bunch of people to make them understand that you are talented and that you're not crazy, and you're going to do a really good job with their show, as well as, you doing your work on your own work, or work in other sort of capacities to show them, okay, well, I can do this. But the thing is that until like the gatekeepers begin to look like us, they like, no matter what your name, like, just the idea that they're mispronouncing your name, or just not even attempting to pronounce your name. You're seeing that with Kamala Harris now, how they're trying to passive aggressively call her, trying to change her name, or mispronounce it on purpose. And it's as if that's gonna, like, that's a stand for something. Like, but you see, like, I mean, obviously you've dealt with this, but it's like this thing where people passive aggressively do this type of behavior in order to say that you actually don't count. You actually are not who you say. You're not actually the director, or you're there because of some sort of racial sort of, whatever. I always, on every show that Jennifer and I've been like running, and every show that I've been on, people have always mistook me for a background performer, or said, you can't eat here. This is only for cast and crew. And like, I swear to God, even on Batwoman, which is like in February, even on Batwoman, and I'm like, I'm the director on Batwoman. And then this third AD was like, are you one of my background performers? And I'm like, I met you yesterday. To be fair, she was a daily, but I was like, but that idea is that, and again, it's very much if you guys are reading Isabel Wilkerson, she writes an incredible book called Caste. And it's very, very it's a caste system. So it's not just sort of race. It's like the idea that this person from this subordinate caste is supposed to be the person in charge. That's like, that fucks up the brain of like your whole programming. And this could be, you're talking about somebody it could be like somebody's 40 or 50 or 60 years of programming, and saying that this person is the subordinate caste. And so they should not be my boss. They should not be in this position. So imagine like all of that programming and what's actually happening with that person when they have to actually say, well, this is, you know, and behave and speak to you and defer to you as their, and again, it's not about deference or whatever, but it's about being, okay, this person's a director or this person's a producer. And that's something that's been on, like, on even shows that I've run, people have said, oh, you can't come in the craft. Like, I literally paid this person's salary, but she just, all she sees is a black face. She didn't actually look at the details of the black face. She just saw the black face and said, no, you can't come in here. This is only for cast and crew. So this is like, this is it.
Yeah.
Can I just say,
yeah, go ahead, Sharon.
Is that okay, Prem? I just want to say, and then what that does to us.
Mhm.
So, right, Namisha? I can't, what that does to us. That's part of the issue too, right? Is that messes, they're messed up. They are so messed up with the institutionalized racism, and that's how they're seeing us, or in the caste system, like you're saying. But then what it does to us. You know, when you walk on set and those microaggressions are already happening before you even start your job, like not saying your name or not spelling your name or not even, you know, putting your name out on a tag, or as soon as you drive up on set. I don't know how many times I have been sent to wardrobe. Like,
I just want to build on that, like, just because, like, it's so right, Sharon, like the first show I did, I had this, you know, Zach Lipowski is a really, you know, great dear friend of mine, and he was the EP. And he came up to me after the first hour and he said, you know, you don't have to say, can I cut? You can just say cut. And it wasn't until that moment that I realized I'm not still interviewing for this position. I have this position. This is my position. I can own this position and it's mine. And I think because there was, you know, everyone was still making me feel like I was a PA on set, I was, you know, in my head, I didn't even realize my language was showcasing that. But it was like, I didn't even realize I was doing it. And then I had to, and now ever since, I'm like really aware of language and how I use it. And it just,
well, it's really critical, these stories, even though sometimes we feel like we're just telling the same stories, but it's so important that people hear the stories and understand the experiences that are still being felt every day by hundreds of people in different types of professions, including the work that you do. Namisha, would you mind talking a little bit about, because Sat's talked a lot about going to LA, getting in front of executives, you know, raising your profile. I know you've been involved in an initiative here with the DGC and BC called Just Watch Us. Do you want to chat, let people know what that's about and how that's worked and your experience with it?
Yeah, for sure. And I see that there were some questions also that kind of like connected with this. So when I joined the union, I became a part of the Directors Advisory Committee here in BC. And that was actually has been really great, because a lot of the experiences I've had, and like Jem Gerard is on it, and, you know, we've been able to sort of use that to sort of deal with certain issues that we have, like just like shadow versus observer. And I know there's a question about how, you know, what happens if you're can't shadow, and observing is important. And I think it's great for building confidence and getting comfortable on set, but that's not really your pathway to directing. To me, it's like the way you become a director is you direct, and you learn how to pitch yourself, and you learn how to pitch your work and promote your work, and so that when you get those meetings and those opportunities, you're prepared and you're ready. And so Just Watch Us was a way of, the campaign was a way of directly targeting this issue that 90% of Vancouver's industry is American-based, US-based productions. And so why aren't they hiring Canadians? And the answer that kept coming back through all the research was that we just don't know any. We just don't know any, and a lot of times they hire who they know. And there's also this, you know, talk about being a person of, you know, that being diverse or being a woman, and then being Canadian on top of that. You're really dealing with quite a few things here, because there's this idea of like inexperience, which I think is a euphemism. I think it's BS. As soon as someone says you're inexperienced, and then when they know you and your work, I think, oh, that's just a lame excuse you're giving to not hire me. And that's just you. That's not me anymore. And so what we did was we said, okay, if they don't know us and they don't know our work and our actual experience, we need to do something about this. So we created directors.ca, which is, you know, professional photos, the demo, the bios, and it's a tool that if you're looking for certain things, like you're looking for someone who does have unscripted experience, or you're looking for someone who does have stunt experience, you can like do a search, and like it'll come up with the names of the people who are BC directors that fit into that fit into that, and it helps network execs just directly like start to make those pre-lists that are evolutions to the actual list. So we just created that as like a step. And then we also, as Prem, you were talking about, we did these, like missions to LA where, 5 people would come and you would prep, you would be ready, and you would go in and you would literally be in the room and be pitching. And the thing was, a lot of times there's this misconception that directors are competing with each other, and this is like all kind of bullshit. Like it's I think it's just this idea that only one of us can make it, and I don't that idea is just total crap. It's like everybody in the room pitching together had a different story, and those stories, when we actually pitched collectively, everyone got stronger, so that the group as a whole suddenly became representative of BC directors, and really saying, look, we're here, we have a voice, we have experience, it's an asset. When you come to film in Vancouver, we know this city, we know locations, if something falls through, like here are all the reasons, that seem obvious to us, but aren't obvious to them. And so, having done these meetings and having execs be like, oh, we thought that you guys were like new to the industry and we were going to have to explain, what our shows were. Like, they literally didn't know that there's all these people who have been working and have these experiences. And like, and you realize, like, and going off what Seth was saying, you have to put in that work and do that networking. And, now in some ways there's no excuses because people are doing Zoom meetings. So you don't even have to fly to LA. So it is about being proactive in every way you can, and becoming a part of the community. Being a member of the DGC has been that for me. But even before that, facilitating those relationships, not just doing mentorship because it's convenient for you, but really trying to build a relationship with people, because it might not pay off in the next 6 months, but it'll definitely pay off in 3 to 4, in a couple of years. And so investing in those relationships and not just doing that, that is immediate ways that people can start facilitating those communities and start building that reputation themselves.
Yeah, and I really like what you say about, community. Like, I've known all of you for many years over different iterations in your careers, in my career, and people are like, you see what's happening in people's careers, and that community, both with the extended community, but also your networks, because that's how this industry has run. So we need stronger networks and help others to build them. We now are going to open it up to questions from people who are tuning in on YouTube. And Suds, I have just a follow-up question from what Namisha just said. You've been working on a couple of US network shows here. So what is that? Is it different working on a US production versus a Canadian television series? Because I know you've done both.
I think some things are different. Like, generally when you're listening to LA, because it's a remote, so it's either a phone call or a Zoom now. Like, for example, the tone meeting, it's just like sort of a one-way transmission from the showrunner to you. And with a Canadian tone meeting, it's kind of more of a back and forth, because they're like, well, what are you bringing to this? And because generally in the US, it's like, okay, it's the showrunner's medium. You're just downloading their information. Like, this is exactly what they want to see. And then if there is moments for you to sort of input and so on, they'll be sort of like, here's where you can, do a little thing or whatever. Or you'll come and it'll actually have to snake through a channel where you go to the writer producer, the producer or the director producer, and then snake your idea through that sort of channel, that sort of back channel. And then sort of, let the showrunner come up, almost think that it's his or her idea. You know what I mean? You have to really be, careful, because there could be a third rail, or that could be like, oh, well, the showrunner's kid came up with that idea, and you that's not going to change, or that could be from the president of the network told the showrunner that story, and that's why it's in the script. So there's, you have to sort of navigate things a little differently. And then maybe with the Canadian showrunner, you may actually have a relation with them, so you can actually be a bit more honest or a bit more open. So it's that kind of thing. But I think always you want to be authentic. And so if the showrunner is saying something, you got to, and you're taking exception to it, you got to figure out how to actually get through but you have to be authentic. But I think that you bring your authentic self to whatever you do. You know, and I think that the difference between the two are subtle. You know, sometimes they're greater because it's the personality of this particular showrunner or this particular person on the set. It could be star driven too. Like you're dealing with bigger stars generally if you're working on an American show. Yes, it could be or could not be. So like there's also just how do you handle or how do you deal with a star? Like I was working on Designated Survivor, Kiefer Sutherland, and his reputation precedes him. Like he's known as a very difficult person and blah, 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 blah. But I try to meet people where they are. So I was told all this stuff. And like, it was my first time directing the show. And, you know, it's been, you know, it was moved from, you know, ABC to Netflix. And it was like, you know, and I was like, you know, it was like literally like people trying to scare me. And I was like, I just try to meet him where he was and try to, you know, and just look at him as an artist, not like famous dude or whatever. And just met him where he was as an actor. And then we had a great time. You know, we were like totally like cool, talked on the phone, and like he was cool. Like he was just a cool dude. And so like even like, you know, I had a situation with like, again, a bigger star, like you're going to be encountering bigger stars when you're on a show. And this is a show that Sharon was on as an actor, Private Eyes, and I was directing William Shatner. And again, it was like, don't talk about Star Trek, you know, it was like all kind of crazy and whatever. And it was like, you know, he was like, you know, first day it was like, action, cut. And, you know, it was a little stiff. And I go, okay, let's go again. Action, cut. Let's go again. And then he did something really good. And I said, great, really nice, Bill. And he goes, oh, praise from the director, how novel. And I was like, oh, Bill, I'm just trying to compliment you here, man. I mean, why are you busting my balls? And he's like, also, as I didn't know you had me. And then everybody was like, what is going on here? And then I just laughed and I like went over and just hugged him, and it was great. But it's like, you can't like be less than who you are. Like you got to be your authentic self, because after that, it was just a respect thing. And then we just like bonded. He was cool. And he came back the next year. He said he wanted to work with me again. But it's like, you have to just be yourself and not be afraid. You know, Namisha, like when you're saying like, you know, I can call a cut, you got to own it. You know, you got to take up the space as a director. You have to, because the crew is looking to you to take up the space. Doesn't matter how, and again, like there's a height thing too. There's a male privilege thing here too. So like there's all of that. And if you are not tall, and if you're not a male, and you don't have a booming voice, you have to somehow occupy that space, because the crew.
Oh, it does. Yeah, I occupy space now. Trust me.
Good.
Yeah, those soft skills can't be underestimated, and that comes with like who you are. Also, you know, that's what you also learn from observing people when you are, you know, having that opportunity to do that. So, you know, I think this is that kind of practical advice right now, I think is really great for people to start to take in and think about. We have a question about the BC directors.ca. I think at this point, Namisha, it's only for BC directors, right?
It is. Right now it is, but hopefully it expands. Just on what you said though, like Prem, I never observed anyone who was a person of color, or like I never had that. I only ever observed, mostly I observed white male directors. And so I think that can also be misleading, because the way that people respond to them when you go do the exact same thing and people don't respond that way to you, like it's a little confusing at first, you know. And so I think that will change hopefully too down the line. But again, you have to take it with a grain of salt. Like to me, it's about being familiar with the process as much as possible. And the only other thing I'll add is like, you know, being like this idea of soft, like, you know, what said about being your authentic self, like, you know, it's not about changing who you are. You're the leader, and you have to lead everyone, and you have to be assertive and be clear and have vision. But I also think, you know, some of the strengths that I've had is when they're like, oh, you know, this young cast, we can't get the performance we want. And, you know, they've written off people as like, they're difficult to work with. And I'll go, and, you know, and you spend the time because you're like, well, no, I'm, you know, who I am, and, you know, being a mother and being, you know, coming from documentary, and, you know, these are skills. These are things that add to me and enable me to communicate and connect with people and resolve things that normally are maybe considered, you know, just written off as problems that can't be dealt with. So I worry about the word soft. We have to be kind of careful, because like things are attributed to being female and like connecting them to something negative is also problematic, because I don't think, you know, of that gentleness or kindness, or, you know, I don't think of those things as, you know, things that are negative about me. I just have had to, you know, you harness them and you use them correctly.
Yeah, no, fair point. Absolutely. We have a few minutes left here. Sharon, what about your approach to directing? What have you learned as you gain more and more experience and how you approach it?
I love that we're talking about that because, Nimisha, I did this on one of my first times directing. I used like my big voice, and because I'm an actor, I acted really tough. And so we were on a tech scout, and I was like, "Here's what we're gonna do," you know, like really, like I know what I'm doing. And then afterwards, the first AD came to me, and she goes, "Is it cool if I run the tech scout?" And I was like, "Oh, right." Because the first ADs do run the tech scout. So I was like, everybody quiet, blah, 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 you know. And so I love what Sets is saying, because what I'm getting from it and what you're getting, what I'm getting from you, Nimisha, is be authentic. And I realized like I was trying to be a director that I've seen, which is, you know, a blustery white guy. And I'm a really good actor. So I think I played a really good blustery white guy, but that's not who I am. And so I really love what you're saying, because there are some skills that I have from Unscripted in working with people who are not actors, who I know how to work with, and being an actor myself, know how to work with, know how to, you know, massage. And even we were on a location scout the other day, and, you know, I'm the only woman of color. And, you know, the guys were talking about like, what if, you know, you did it from this, and what if you, and I was able to take it in as help, but also go, cool, but here's where it's gonna be from this angle. So it's a balance. And I really think it's what both of you guys are saying. I so agree. Like we have to be authentic, and they're not soft skills. They're ingenious skills that are a benefit of my gender and having to, you know, dual cultures all the time.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sharon. I feel like this will be our second topic if the four of us come together again, because I think that's really a lot of what people are trying to figure out, right? Like you don't have to act like the people ahead of you to make something great. So thank you all for that point. We have just about 3 minutes left. And just as we wrap up, one final question from someone who's watching. At what point in your career did you join the DGC? This might be a longer question. I think some of you addressed it earlier. But any tips on how to get involved with your local DGC? Sharon?
I joined the DGC right after I did my feature film. Oh, sorry. I joined the DGC right after I did my feature film. And as Nimisha said, I didn't really know what that meant, or, you know, what I had no idea. I just was like, I'm going to be a director in scripted. I guess I'll join the DGC. And it's only in the last couple of years that I feel like the DGC has opened up and really is receptive to members that they don't go and golf with. So it was helpful. It was definitely helpful because it got me in that stream.
Right. And what about you, Suds? You were not on mute. Now you are on. Now you are muted.
Oh gosh. I was doing like I was trying to get in as a PA. I was trying to get in as a like whatever, and then again it was like nothing, like no, and you needed like 3 letters and all kind of crazy stuff. And so I actually got in after like Sean Levy, who's like EP on, you know, Stranger Things and you know, Night at the Museum, all that. He gave me my first job on The Famous Jet Jackson as a director. And that was a long time ago. He just like had some faith in me, and so that was a first gig. And then so and then they let me in because I had a job. They had a category called associate director. So I don't know. Like it's now a little easier to go in as like as you can come in as a PA, or you can come in through these associate director categories if you have experience outside the union. But that was how I got in, and I had to get like 3 people to sign me in, but 3 people who I casually knew. I didn't have a relationship with them. So, but those letter requirements, I'm not sure if they're still around. But it's like, it's a little bit easier to get in. But as I tell everybody, it's like, if you want to be a director, you got to just be a director and direct whatever it is, whether it be a play, whether it be a commercial, whether it be a spec, whatever, just direct.
Yeah. And finally, Nimisha, you have 20 seconds basically to wrap this up for us on the DGC BC.
UGC, yeah, I think the key thing here is, they're definitely looking to, I think that there's a need for a diverse group of directors and for the DGC to reflect that. I know they're working very hard on that. So again, I would say, so not to sound like a broken record, but it's relationships. You build those relationships, and with members who are in the DGC, and you make that effort to become familiar, often even with directors.ca, like take a look at what's going on and come to those events, participate in come to those panels, ask questions, connect with these directors. Because again, a lot of this industry is referral based. It's like, if you know people and they built a relationship with you and they know where you're headed, they can at the right time help facilitate those introductions. So I know that that's how it happened for me in a lot of ways, for a lot of opportunities, even for my agent, my American agent, that came through a referral from a director friend of mine. So again, I think this idea of not knowing directors, not being friends with directors, and not having us help each other out is a mistake. It's like, we are all in this together and we can help each other out. So if you don't know someone, just reach out to them and start building that relationship.
Wonderful. Thank you, Namisha, and thank you everybody who took time to watch today, and everybody at Real World and Tanya Williams for inviting me to moderate this panel. It's been a real privilege to speak to all of you. So many more things to talk about, but our time is complete, and wish you well. And yeah, let's find ways to network in this new world for now, and we will continue to meet hopefully someday in the future, not too far. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Everybody.